Science Fiction Future Now. We're going to be in conversation here about, and I'll just read the panel description because I think it's a good setup. And what we'll do is I'll read the panel description, we'll go down the line, we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll begin to discuss science fiction and future now. So science fiction has ever been the muse of real-world advances, but now we live in an age where we achieve it almost as soon as we think it. So how do we as writers out-dream the dream makers? How do we handle the truth of real science and the fiction that is needed for writing our stories? Is it a crisis for the writer's imagination, or does it serve to inspire? So that was the question that I had, because I have that as a writer. My name is Cecil Castellucci. I write mostly young adult novels, some science fiction, some that have some real science in them, a book called Tin Star and Stone in the Sky, and then some that have no science in them, like Star Wars, Moving Target, a Princess Leia adventure. I also write comic books. I have a new ongoing coming out on DC Comics about an alien who possesses the body of a 16-year-old girl. It's called Shade the Changing Girl. Comes out in October. And I've written numerous sci-fi short stories that have been Tor.com, Strange Horizons, and stuff like that. That's me.
I'm Sherri L Smith, and I write young adult and middle grade novels primarily. I've also written comics for Bongo Comics. My spec fiction book is Orleans, right here. It came out a few years ago, set in a future post-disaster New Orleans. And, I talked to a lot of doctors and scientists to make sure that I got my deadly viruses straight. What do you need to know about me? So I used to work in animation. I've worked in live action film. I now teach in a couple of different MFA programs at Goddard College in Hamlin in their children's writing MFA program. And my next book comes out in a few weeks. It's called Pasadena, and I write every genre. So the next one's not sci-fi, it's a noir mystery, but I'm still excited about it.
Is this on? Hello? Are we hot? Okay. Hi, I'm Greg Van Eekhout. I write science fiction and fantasy. Most of my science fiction is actually in my short stories, which have been in Asimov's and Strange Horizons and fantasy and science fiction. I write for adults. I also write middle grade books. My one science fiction middle grade is The Boy at the End of the World. But I actually try to inject science in my fantasy as well. If you have fire and horse bits and things like that in fantasy, you have technology, so there's no reason why we also shouldn't have genomics and artificial intelligence and that stuff in fantasy. Oh, and my latest is, I have a comic book that's totally fantasy and nothing to do with this panel, but if you come up to me afterwards, I got some free copies.
Hi, my name is Madeline Ashby, and I am a science fiction writer and futurist. So what that means is that companies approach me and organizations approach me with a new technology that they have invented, or a new platform, or a new service, or what have you, and they say, hey, can you write a story about this so that our engineers know the human cost of it? And I say, sure, which is why I don't have a lot of published short stories, because they all go to this limited market that only a few people ever see. But for everybody, there is books like Company Town, which which Tor Books so graciously agreed to publish in May of this year, and that's about a bodyguard for the United Sex Workers of Canada, Union Local 314, who agrees to become the bodyguard for the new owner of the oil rig city that she lives on, who appears to be receiving death threats from the future. So when I am not writing for Intel Labs or the Institute for the Future or Sci Futures or Nesta or those people, I'm writing for Tor and also for Angry Robot. I am the author of the Machine Dynasty series, which is about robots who eat each other. It's about cannibalizing self-replicating humanoid robots. So yeah, that's what I do.
Oh, hi, I'm Emily Lakdawalla, Senior Editor and Planetary Evangelist for the Planetary Society. I'm the one science fact writer on this panel, I think. I am writing about space robots, their exploration of the solar system in past and present, at the Planetary Society blog, which is planetary.org/blog. I'm writing my first book about Curiosity rover from its conception to its couple years on Mars. And while everybody else here on this panel is talking about how much science or not goes into their stories, I think that it's worth mentioning that when you're a science fact writer, it's very important to put story into your science writing so that people are engaged and interested in reading it.
My name is Javier Grillo-Marxuach, and I write the sort of stuff that makes people want to go into science, and then they realize it's nothing like what we wrote. And then I write the kind of stuff that scientists look at and go, Jesus Christ! Among those things are Lost, in which I was a writer and producer for its first 2 seasons. I also worked on Helix, which I know had a lot of scientists pulling out their hair. And I created a show called The Middleman, and I was a writer of, oh, thank you. I was a writer on The 100 last season, and yeah, that's me. So bring me all of your complaints about how badly we handle science in television, because I'm guilty as charged.
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to put together this panel is because I feel like we've gotten to a point in science where we're discovering things so quickly, and sort of the things that we use, our job as writers is to dream things up and to dream to, imagination. And like 100 years ago or 120 years ago, you had people dreaming about what the moon might look like or what Mars might look like. But now we know we've been to the moon and we've been to Mars, and we just saw Pluto. And so I wondered about, like, how does that affect us as storytellers when we don't have those geographies to have our imagination on anymore? Because I don't worry about that. I'm excited about it. Every single time I see, like, a heart on Pluto, I get, like, 20 million ideas about stories about that. But at the same time, it makes sort of what you can say, like, yes, there's life on Mars, Well, maybe there is. Who knows, right? I mean, it could be something. Emily?
Confirm or deny.
There's a couple of things that I want to say about that. First of all, is that before you explore a new world like Pluto for the first time last year, you actually have to take on the role of a science fiction writer. You have to imagine what it might be like, so that you can design a spaceship with the right kinds of instruments in order to actually be able to see all of those things. So there's a lot of imagination that goes into planning an actual space mission. And then once you've been there, you're almost always completely wrong about what you thought was there. It's one of the things about planetary science that I like. It's constantly humbling, because nearly every scientific paper in planetary science is at least partially wrong. And a lot of them turn out to be mostly wrong by the time you get the next mission there. So, just because we've sent one spacecraft to fly by Pluto doesn't mean we know everything about Pluto by a long shot. It just makes us think about so many more different questions now that we have to answer that we didn't have before. It's like job security for planetary scientists. There's always new questions that you get from your exploration, and more new things to do.
So Emily, if you're often wrong, then why are you so angry at Javi for totally being wrong in his science?
You know what? I'm actually not that angry at TV and movies for how they portray things, as long as they're consistent. It's when people make rules for their universes and then break them, so you can't predict what's going to happen based on the rules of the world. So I don't know if you have anything to say.
No, it's interesting. There are shows that I have worked on where the science is just absolutely reprehensible. I mean, there's just no way around it. Like, radiation doesn't work that way. Pathogens don't work that way. Bacteria doesn't work that way. I mean, and where you see legitimate sort of shortcuts taken that I think are beyond some of the shortcuts that people should take when they're dealing with science on TV, because the answers are easy to find, and a lot of the time it's more about expediency than it is about accuracy, and frankly, accuracy is just not that hard to achieve in so many things, especially when you're doing narrative fiction. On the other hand, the thing that my own reading of science and my own sort of knowledge and understanding of the universe tells me is that you're going to be wrong most of the time, but the other thing is that you're going to be right in ways that you don't even know. And a lot of the time, we will, or I will come up with something first and then do the research and find out that the research indicates things that are significantly weirder than anything that I could come up with. And in a lot of ways, science is kind of like pornography, in that
You know it when you see it?
there's nothing. No. I believe in the scientific method. I believe observation and reproducibility are key, and clarity. No, but in that if you can come up with something, chances are somebody has already done that and filmed it. And that's so it's I think that doing some of the basic research and getting the basic rights is crucial so that you can then take greater leaps off of it.
And I think one of the things that TV often has to do is they have to take this shortcut where a scientist comes up with a hypothesis, they do an experiment, and they get their conclusion, and the science is done. And most of the time, science is just confusing. You come up with an experiment, and the results don't make any sense, or they're not statistically significant, and you must be asking the wrong question, but you don't know how. And you have to be, again, you have to be really creative in order to find your way around those problems.
Greg, were you about to say something?
Yeah, well, the idea that the expansion of our scientific knowledge would actually be a challenge to science fiction, I think it might be the opposite. The more we know, the easier it is. Because basically, I think as fiction writers, what we're looking for is how does stuff get screwed up? So if I know that there's like, and I probably don't know this, but if there's a nitrogen ocean below the surface of Titan, no? A different one?
Methane.
Methane? All right.
And water.
And water. Then I
That
know
is
if I'm
one
exploring
stinking
that,
ocean.
If I know if I'm exploring that world, then it's going to be cool if my rover or whatever cracks through the ice and is stuck in a methane ocean. You know, it's just the more we know, the more ideas we get, the more ideas we get, the more we can basically screw up the lives of our characters in fun and interesting ways.
Yeah, I think that I hear a lot of complaints about, everything is dystopian now. Where is the optimism? We went to the moon, and like all these different, where is my jetpack? And it's like, well, you were promised a jetpack, and what you got was Agent Orange, and so like
That seems like a ripoff.
yeah, you voted wrong, and so I think that there's this frustration that, in theory, we're not doing big things anymore. And in some ways we aren't, but we've gotten the internet. We've gotten implantable technologies that can stop a seizure in its tracks, or that can end depression. Like we've gotten so much that I think, because the speed of technology seems like it's always increasing, it's really easy to take for granted the advancements that we've made. Even 20 years ago, a cancer diagnosis was very different. 20 years ago, an AIDS diagnosis was very different. Now those are not survivable, but those are livable diseases. The quality of life is so much greater. And we shouldn't take those for granted. There is lots of reason for optimism. It's just, not rocket-shaped.
And I think
Always.
I think one of the things that, we as writers are very good at is coming up with one thing that then you extrapolate into an entire world building. And if you look at, but I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said that everybody knew we were going to get to the moon eventually, but nobody knew we'd be watching it on television. And I think that's what's interesting about what we do as writers is that by and large our job is to usually look at one or two technologies and go, oh, here's how that becomes a metaphor for the human condition. But it seldom takes into account how it feeds into all the other technologies. And one of the things that, so our field is very limited, and it's usually very limited by the fact that we're trying to say one thing about the human condition that is a preoccupation of ours, for which we have found a technological metaphor. But by and large, then, all of the other ramifications of it sort of go by the wayside. One of the things that I find really interesting is, in my reading of science fiction, very few people seem to really kind of predict the impact that social media would have on every aspect of our culture, of our politics, of even science, and that's something that a lot of people 20, 30 years ago knew that we would have something like the internet, or that there would, all a number of things, but few people realized that it would have this effect on turning us all into sort of performance artists, and that it would create this sort of ability to mobilize large crowds of people on individual projects. So things like that often are lost on the fiction writers, because our job is really to look at one thing and say, that can be used to examine a piece of what makes me feel bad or good right now,
Does that speak to a failure of imagination on a fiction writer's part? Like I try to extrapolate from real world science so that my fiction feels possible. But if you're only extrapolating from what you know, are you failing to innovate the thing that might change everything? Writing the thing that is not currently possible at all, that inspires some scientists to create in a different. I agree, in a different in a different direction, a different trajectory.
I don't know. That's a really interesting question because for me, for me, it's really and I'm sort of old school in how I approach science fiction. My favorite television show is The Twilight Zone, and that's really all about finding one thing that represents an emotional state that is to be explored. And a lot of the time, like it's interesting. Like one of my favorite sort of dystopian movies is Gattaca.
Me too.
And it's a really wonderful movie. It doesn't bear any scrutiny beyond the 2 hours for which it exists. If you actually try to figure out how that world could possibly exist, it falls apart completely, but it weaves that spell for the 2 hours. And I wonder sometimes if, in terms of television and films, the audience, a novel you pick up, you read, if the information feels dense or overloaded, you put it down, you think about it, you pick it back up. Whereas I think in terms of TV and film, you really have to weave a spell for that you're dictating the temporal dynamics of it, as opposed to the person who's receiving it. So the world building has to be a little simpler, And I think in novels you have more of a freedom to create on multiple levels, for that. I don't know.
But also to sort of say what you were saying is that now, just in the last, year, 2 years, this CRISPR, stuff where it's we'll put fish stuff in your eyeballs and you can see deeply in a weird way or whatever. That's not really what it is. So CRISPR, I don't really know what it is. It's something so fantastic, but it's like
I can explain
Yes, please, Madeline,
if
take
I wear
it.
fish on my head, I'll look better?
No,
What?
it's but they can if you go.
CRISPR is a hotly contested technology that multiple teams across the United States, France, and elsewhere worked on for many, many years. And as usual, the women scientists who innovated it first got shafted. And it's an RNA rewriting tool.
Right. So,
it's
genetic engineering.
It's a rewriting tool that works in much the same way that retroviral drugs work, and that other viruses work, in that they sort of edit their way into your genome. So they work like hackers, essentially getting into your code. What's interesting about CRISPR is that it doesn't need to, unlike other pieces of genetic code, it doesn't need to be hooked on. It doesn't need the right end or the right Lego piece to hook onto something. It can change into its own Lego piece. And so it can be used to put in a helpful bit of fish DNA, or a helpful bit of your mom's DNA, or a helpful bit of whatever, to sort of fix what might be wrong. The problem with that,
or to enhance what you already have, because they were sorry to interrupt. They were talking about it, and they were talking about how do humans go to deep space?
Yep.
How do we go to deep space? Well, we could maybe edit your eyeball so that you don't have the eyeball problems that astronauts have now, and stuff like that.
So your fingernails won't fall off anymore.
Is if that's just astounding. And you couldn't have dreamt, you could dream that up, but now it's an actual thing that...
Yeah, no, and actually that's not to do this, but that's one of the things that I dwell on in this book, is that suddenly you have the possibility for a privilege gap at the level of genetics. And there are arguments that we sort of already have that, and we perpetuate that through terrible social dynamics. But at a certain point, when something like genetic enhancement is controlled by your HMO, you run into some problems. and things like that. So I think that there's a responsibility to talk about sort of the potential of all of these innovations at the social level as well, and at sort of that's almost the second order. It's one thing to see sort of the possibility of the internet. It's another thing to think about the possibility of cyberbullying.
Well, and also it's just to go back to Gattaca, which is what made me think about CRISPR. It's you can only write the Gattaca story in a world that doesn't really make sense the way that it is, but then as technology sort of, then you can think, your HMO could control your CRISPR and...
I think what's interesting, I have a degree in strategic foresight and innovation, so I have a design degree, but without being able to draw a straight line at all. And one of the things that you learn is that sometimes it doesn't matter whether it's possible, it's whether people want it. Engineers and designers will work to create what people want. Because and a lot of sort of business lore and design lore is filled with that story. The invention of the Palm Pilot was the CEO of that company walking around with a little piece of wood in his shirt pocket saying, deck of cards this heavy. I want it to look like this. And they're like, no, it's gonna, do you see cell phones now? Because this is like 1989. And he's like, do you understand how these things work? Deck of cards this heavy. and they got it. Because that's, the drive is there. And that's the sort of flip side of there needing to be a business case for these things, for certain of those things.
I have a question. We're talking a bit about nobody foresaw how social media would turn us all into performance artists, or nobody foresaw cyberbullying. So my dad was a chemist for the Department of Agriculture, and on his nightstand, I got my sci-fi love from him, and on his nightstand he always had a copy of the book Future Shock.
Yep.
And which I never read, but it was like this pink and purple space age city on the cover, and I always thought cool adult stuff. But it's now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the concept of that is that technology is speeding up to the point where humanity cannot keep up.
Yeah.
And it's going to have repercussions on us that we haven't even considered. I guess one of my questions is, I think that's happening. I think that's clearly happening. Is fiction a way to help us readapt to a quickly changing technological world?
You just described my entire career. That's my entire when I'm not doing this, I'm doing exactly that.
Yeah.
Well, exactly that in terms of describing how we keep our humanity, or in terms of describing how the future is over. I mean, when you say that's your
yeah.
Can you unpack what you
Yeah. So a lot of what I do when I write what are called science fiction prototypes, I end up writing sort of about the potential for change and the potential for social impact and so on, that are proposed by a certain technology, and so part of that is sort of preparing, showing engineers how it might work in real time with real people who haven't been working on the problem for 3 years. And part of that is sort of showing a board of trustees. Sometimes it's showing a board of trustees hey, by the way, this is how people might actually use this. This is what you should prepare for. But it is an emotional preparation. The thing that you learn about the future is that people have really intense feelings about it. There's a lot of emotion to get at when you talk about the future, because you are talking about hope and fear and anxiety and dread and yearning and things like that. So part of the speed at which our technology seems to unfold, and now crucially the speed that we get news about it, because that's changed, does create sort of a little bit of wear and tear. There's this emotional cycle that when you're on a constant hype cycle, it really does feel like a roller coaster. Warren Ellis just published a novella about people who are sort of tired of this cycle, who have to go away on retreat in order to sort of deal with that problem.
Go on, I'm sorry.
So no, I think that it is. I think what you're talking about is a very real issue, and so yeah, you do kind of have to prepare and sort of figure out a way to negotiate that.
But your question was also specifically about, does fiction prepare us or shield us in some meaningful way from future shock, from the idea that...
Does it help us adapt? Is it a therapy, I guess? Can fiction be a therapy for future shock? Maybe,
Well, I think it's incredibly important. I think a lot of people who are into science and engineering go into it in part because it doesn't have all that messy human stuff. They think that it's this logical, value neutral thing, when it's not. It's a human endeavor, and people have human motivations and human feelings as they do it. And I think that fiction is a way to get to people who have that kind of attitude about science and engineering, and to help them realize that there are social ramifications to the work that they're doing. So I think it's very important.
Oh, Greg, go first.
I think as a population, we're actually really, really, really good at not being shocked by developments in technology and not being shocked by the future. I think we're really good at just kind of rolling with it. Except for that poor person. That person's profoundly shocked.
Yeah, no.
The future was like going outside in the world, and it's horrible.
Yeah,
Get
no.
it.
She got her first computer, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah,
So I'm just thinking Google Maps, which actually we're all used to using now. We don't really think about how miraculous it is, but this thing knows where you are, not just like as a point in space, but it knows where you are in terms of the urban geography you're surrounded by. And this is what freaks me out. It actually knows what direction you're pointing. I mean, maybe TMI, but I've sat on the toilet. It knows which direction I'm facing. Now, that is...
No, if it's number 1 or number 2?
Probably does, but it chose not to share that. So I find
it'll
that...
tell the NSA either way.
And that's good, because maybe I need some medical intervention at times. But I find like that technology is miraculous, but what I find is what I think we often do is we turn it into jokes and memes.
Yeah.
I mean, think of all the technology that went into Pokemon Go. I mean, it's amazing. Or I was in the DC booth, and there was a demo from Google. And this guy was saying, like, we've now taken the technology of photo analysis, and we've taken the technology of self-driving cars, and we've turned it into an app when you read comics. You can click on a thing, and it makes the word bubble bigger so you can read it. And I'm thinking, like, that's a really mundane, kind of boring piece of technology. It makes the word bubble bigger. But then I think of like all the technologies that went into developing that, and it's the practical use of these things that we get to actually do within a couple of years of development or less that makes us able just to sort of adapt and overcome that shock. I don't feel future shock. I feel fear, but not shock.
I have a question. So, humans, so far, we only live a certain amount of time, right? And so what do you think are, like, as people who are interested in writing about the future or, in science fiction, trying to dream what the future may be, but we have this very limited time that we're here, how do we stretch our vision to the future while also, and have hope for the future, while also only really being in this, in this little sliver that we've got? Like, what is our responsibility to
Well,
that?
I have very strong feelings about that. I think that, we have a responsibility to our own mortality. And that responsibility is to teach whatever we know as efficiently and cogently as possible. Because, the one of the things that I find technology is great at is, especially in our current day, is that it allows the dissemination of knowledge on a scale that has never existed before. And, living in a world of that kind of data abundance, I think only throws up a bigger kind of lens on the idea that what we know and the things at which we're expert and which we have mastery are really not our property to hoard and to merely profit from, but they're something that could have major sort of benefits down the line that we may not have even foreseen. And I think that, we have to use whatever technologies at our disposal. One time it was scrolls and wax tablets, and now it's podcasts and all that, to really be generous with what we know, because mortality is something to be respected, and everything you take to the grave does not stay in this world with you.
But it's not just like what we might benefit from or what people might benefit from down the line, but also what the cost is, right? Because there are a lot of things that we've done, and I mean, just to take it back to story, like, I think that, Madeline, you're really interested in sort of like, how do we, there's so much post-apocalyptic science fiction, so much dystopic science fiction, but what about optimistic science, yeah.
There's no good word for it.
There's no good word for it, but we should make one.
Hopeful.
Yeah, hopeful science fiction, because that way we can dream what a better future might be than what is very obvious, just like, everything is terrible, and then it's going to get worse.
Yeah, no, so I've worked on a couple of different optimistic SF projects, the Shine anthology and also the Hieroglyph anthology, which was based on a Neil Stephenson idea, and they asked for sort of these hopeful science fiction stories or stories of a hopeful future, and so I wrote about the future of drone bombings and the future of immigration and border security, and so they were. Because I think that, it's not enough to talk about a great invention. You have to talk about how technology intervenes at the most painful points in people's lives. because that's where the lack of hope happens, right? So that's, you have to intervene at the pain points. You have to intervene or design interventions for the places where it hurts and where things are difficult. And so I think, I ended up writing sort of bittersweet stories because to me the most hopeful thing is the idea that things can change. The idea that a future is possible, the idea that change can occur, and the idea that people have enough agency in their own lives to help make that change happen. And I think that's the biggest lie, is that you don't have control over your own life, or that change will never occur. That is in fact the most toxic dystopian thing you can ever believe, that change is impossible.
Well, and this goes back to what Sherri, you were saying about like what is our responsibility in our fiction to make sure that the future, that we are able to imagine things that we can't even possibly imagine yet.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm going to say. I think that historically, speculative fiction writers have been both muse and morality police for the technology that we have. We've inspired, me and Mary Shelley, we've inspired things that, we've inspired new ideas, but we've also cautioned people against the possible moral and ethical pitfalls of those ideas. And it's interesting that we're just sort of coming out of the dystopian swamp right now, which does seem very negative, I think, particularly in adult fiction. Young adult fiction, middle grade fiction tends to be more hopeful, because we don't want to be responsible for all those suicides. We want people to see that there is hope out there. But I worry about, Greg, you said that you're not worried about future shock, that you think that there's fear but not shock. And I think there is future shock, but it's reading as numbness. And it's reading as a distancing and a loss of empathy. And so that's something that I'd like to see an acknowledgement of and an extrapolation of in science fiction moving forward, is what happens when we lose that element of humanity that lets us walk in someone else's shoes or make the decision that this might be the wrong path.
I think that we need to be sort of a little more forgiving of ourselves as a species, and I know that seems odd because, everybody, it's so easy to look at the world in these sort of catastrophic terms, but when you look at, you talk about the loss of empathy, you talk about how people bully each other on social media, you talk about the fact that, not the fact, but the idea that too much of the popular fiction may be dystopian and all of that, but I think that in bringing that together with the idea of future shock, like I live in a pretty constant state of future shock. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty confused. I find the world absolutely bewildering. And, the way that I cope with it is not to seek the comfort of certainty, but to try to make friends with the idea of uncertainty. To make friends with the idea that the things that will change, the things that will be different are things that even, with the most effort, I'm not going to be able to foresee. And having some faith that sort of endless churn of events is going to continue because, people have been writing dystopian fiction since, there has been fiction, and the fact is we don't live, as you said, we don't live in an unchanging, hopeless world, regardless of all of the horrible things that happen. So I think in some way we need to sort of look at ourselves, especially in terms of the social media of it and how much hate and trolling and all of that there is, and realize that we have exactly 6 years under our belt with Facebook. We have probably about 20 years under our belt altogether with the idea that everybody can broadcast their thoughts, everybody can approach anybody, and that does not forgive people who use it to hate or people who use it to express hateful things and all that. But I think that we need to also look at the picture of this is how an adolescent deals with a new thing, and to look at humanity's relationship with technology as one that in those early years we are adolescents using toys that are powerful in ways we do not even understand. And I think that being able to approach that and to kind of make friends with the uncertainty of how we will evolve past a stage of cruelty that is enabled by something to how we use it as more enlightened people is also part of the forecasting we need to do.
So Emily, I have a question for you. Like in a real world scenario, I mean, we're talking cautionary tales and this element of our writing. Have there been missteps in science that have been foretold by by fiction, or have there been questions brought up by scientists because of something they read?
Oh gosh, that's a really difficult
I
question to
know,
answer.
and it's all yours,
I
baby.
I don't have a
You can
past
make it up
one.
because we won't know.
Well, I don't have a past one, but I have one that's really weighing a lot on planetary scientists' minds these days, and that's something called planetary protection. So planetary protection is the idea that one of the main things that we're doing as we explore the solar system was trying to answer the question, are we alone in the universe? Is there life elsewhere? Did it originate in other worlds? And the worst possible thing we could do as we begin to explore the solar system is to inadvertently seed life on other planets and then discover it later and not be sure if we brought it there or not. And so for that reason, any spacecraft that lands on Mars has to be more sterile than most other spacecraft that explore the solar system, because we think of Mars as one place that can support life. If that spacecraft is likely to touch water on Mars, it has to be super sterile. And so we try to protect things. But there's something we're talking about doing on Mars in the near future that's going to throw all that out the window, and that's sending people, because you can't sterilize a person. And so not that way.
But I mean, just to put this in terms that my primitive mind can understand, like you're saying, Matt Damon pees in the methane ocean, and the next thing you know, there's like an ammonia methane creature that evolves.
That looks like
and it's our fault.
Yeah,
Right.
basically.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. So you can find a bacterial ecosystem
Stories are
in
made.
Europa's ocean or in a Martian aquifer. And then you'll be like, okay, is this a bacterial ecosystem that evolved on Mars independently? Was there panspermia, the material was brought from Mars and seeded Earth? You can't answer all those questions for certain if you brought it with you. And yet we're looking at, I mean, it's quite likely that in 20 or 30 years at the outside, there's going to be people, and again, these questions will be out the window. So how do you handle the exploration of new worlds and try not to mess up your ability to answer these questions?
Do we have no genetic markers or things that would say, oh, that's from Earth, it's got a little trademark on the bottom of
Well,
it?
you could.
CRISPR.
But you could, but there's this idea of panspermia, which is the idea that life could have originated elsewhere and come to Earth on space rocks. And there are actually planetary scientists who use this facility called the NASA Ames Vertical Gun Range. They take bacterial spores, put them on little rocks, fire them at 5 kilometers per second into targets, and then check to see if any of those spores survived, and sometimes they do. So it is possible, and not only that, but it's easier to send things from Mars to Earth, because that's deeper in the gravity well toward the sun, than it is to send things in the other direction. So almost certainly stuff from Earth has wound up elsewhere, life from Earth has wound up elsewhere in the solar system. It probably didn't survive, but it could have been transported. But it would have been easier to send it from Mars to Earth. So who knows, we could all be Martians. We might have originated on Mars and been transported to Earth. And so that would be a really interesting thing to find out. But we wouldn't be able to be certain whether that had happened if we contaminate Mars before we explore for life there.
Well, on the other hand, we could be Martian tardigrades, and that's just what it is.
Right.
All right.
That's
just
beautiful.
solved
There's an episode of Star Trek Next
Um,
Generation about that.
So, Cecil, we have we have about 15 minutes to go. Should we open this to questions? Should we begin the Q&A process?
I think we should start the Q&A.
We have 15 minutes to go.
I'm going to make my exit.
Cecil has to make her exit.
Cecil has to
And
go
here-
be a
and
big
so-
important
so-
writer.
Yes. Please give a hand of applause to Cecil Castellucci. So what happens now is that I take over as the panel moderator for the Q&A because I'm a bit of a bully person and I'm good at that. Questions begin with how or why or do and not with I. So please just, as you go up to the microphone, please remember that. Also, before we go into our first question, this august group of people, including Cecil herself, are going to be doing an autograph signing after this panel at booth AA09.
Autograph Alley at 6 p.m.
That's right. I will have copies of my new comic book, and everybody here will have copies of their comic books and novels and all that. Please come and tell us what you hated about what we said, and then buy our books. Or just buy our books.
Or bring us tacos.
Yes, or bring us tacos. So, okay, first question.
I'm wondering if you bother to future-proof the technology in your fiction, and if so, how? So when you're working on the story and you have technology in it, do you try to make it that it's a story that can be read in 20 years and people won't go, oh, these people were so stupid. Everyone's going to have a phone in their pocket. They don't need a little badge on their shoulder to press to talk. You know, do you work on that kind of stuff? You know, no one can survive the 22nd century without a single-payer healthcare. It just doesn't. It's not going to happen.
You know what I think is that you're writing it now, and it's the future, and then when the future comes, it's just an alternate history.
Yeah, and I think the point isn't actually to accurately predict the future. I think the point is to construct a version of the future in which the characters are actually experiencing human emotions and human struggles. But I'll tell you, my buddy Tobias Bickel wrote a book called Arctic Rising, which is basically about the opening of the Arctic to shipping. And he was watching the news as the clock was ticking towards his book release, saying, "Get that book out there
now." You do a little bit. You do future-proof it a little bit. You kind of, I always run the test of like, can I see someone actually buying this? Like, have I designed a service that people will actually participate in? Have I put in an invention that people will actually want to use? And then I think, oh, okay, so like someone is probably dumb enough to invest in this, sure. And so I think about it that way often. But otherwise, you know, that's a great way to get trapped in a procrastinatory feedback loop. That's pride screwing with you. So worry about that less than just getting it done.
Well, if I can use it to procrastinate, I'm totally doing
No, yeah, exactly. I think there's a feedback loop there that you run the risk of getting involved in that can turn self-defeating really quickly. Science fiction is about the present. It's about what you're afraid of and what you hope for.
And of course, I don't invent technology in my writing, but I think it's worth mentioning in this context that the kind of technology we use to explore planets is so much less capable than the technology that's in this instrument that I can hold in my hand. So you can write all kinds of reasons for why modern technology isn't available in whatever endeavor you're writing about.
You know, going back to Gattaca, which I seem to be bringing up a lot in this conversation, the thing I love most about Gattaca is how not future-proof it is. In fact, it's a world where, you know, they have extremely sophisticated genetic engineering, and also everybody loves mid-century modern furniture. And, you know, like the way that Andrew Niccol worked his way around the idea that this future might look dated is that he basically created an aesthetic that is consistent through the entire film, that is very cold, very mid-century modern. You know, he's using Avanti and Studebaker cars. He's using, you know, everybody sitting on Barcelona chairs, you know, and all of that. And when you watch that film, or something like Brazil by Terry Gilliam, or, you know, even Star Wars, which is not predictive, but whatever, I think that one of the ways that, as a writer and as a creator, I work around the idea that I have to future-proof stuff is just to create an aesthetic in which everything is justifiable within the visual aesthetic. And that honestly seems to take care a lot of that, you know. And I did a pilot called Future Tense, which was supposed to be 20 years in the future, and we shot it in 2003. And it's terrible, you'll never see it, it's available nowhere. But, you know, I was really into Blobjects, which was the sort of 2000 aesthetic of very sort of tactile, and the whole thing was Blobjects. It looks awful. You know, so it really, you have to kind of reach, you know, for a lot of you have to find a way of making it visually, of having visual integrity, at least in TV and film. So, next question, please.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you. Oh wait,
No.
So I have a couple of flip-flops. You guys are scared of a couple. Now you guys aren't scared, but the things you mentioned is how society is going to react to technology. But then we didn't bring up AI, and I'm freaked out about it. Like, I don't think you're going to be. You're thinking that technology is going to bring empathy to humans, and we're just going to stop caring about each other. But then we might build something that doesn't care about us, and that's something crazy. Very fiction. That's all over the place. We're getting there. Nobody's going to care whether to push the button or not. They're just going to do it, and we'll be at the whim of that. And then the other part is, how much does the writing affect the scientist? How much does the fiction do scientists see and be like, wait, I think we can do that? Like, instead of thinking about, you know, are we matching the science? Is it the other way around ever, where a scientist goes, wait, this writing, maybe we can do that? And those are just a couple of my questions that I thought of while
I think the most dangerous thing is not how science fiction influences scientists, it's how it influences venture capitalists.
And policymakers.
And policymakers, because like the people who are actually working on the AI that you're talking about, like that's actually what my other novels were about. They're really, like, what's really intriguing is when you get a group of billionaires who all grew up watching The Terminator. Because the one thing that never gets covered in science fiction is people writing grants or grant applications.
Which is like 50% of what scientists do.
Yeah, no, like the thing that holds a lot of science back, I think, is, funding. It's just funding. It's just logistics and stuff. That's what holds people back. And that's what makes research take so long. The speed of innovation has been financed by people with very specific desires. And that's what I think, that's the thing to freak out about. If you want to leave here with something to freak out about. On the other hand, I think that because of that, there are a lot of people, there are, and I think that this is what Elon Musk is trying to do. I think Elon Musk sort of decided that he was, having worked with Peter Thiel, he decided he was going to be the anti-Peter Thiel. and really wanted to finance good in the world. And that's why we have SpaceX and other things. So there's reason for hope.
I was going to say, as a writer, I have to believe that when actual AI shows up, it's going to be something really significantly different than anything that I can imagine. Because most of the stories that I read about AI are about our relationship to authority. Either the AI is the abused party or the abuser party, but it really is about did mommy and daddy love me or not. We have 5 minutes to go, so so honestly, once AI shows up, I have a feeling it's going to be something completely different than that, and the fiction really is just about us processing our familial dynamics in an interesting way.
I think to answer the second question, one thing that I've observed is that scientists, just nearly every scientist has been influenced by science fiction. They're all Star Trek or Star Wars fans. They're not all both kinds of fans. But they've all read a lot of science fiction. They're very influenced about it. They think about these things happening in the future. But I don't know that it always works in the opposite direction. It doesn't always seem true that people who are big science fiction fans are actually all that interested in the actual exploration of the planets in our solar system. It's almost like it's too mundane. The challenges that you have having to spend 6 years flying to Jupiter or whatever it is, that it's just not as exciting. And I want to try to figure out how to tap into the excitement that we all feel about sci-fi and try to get people more excited about real space exploration.
I think there's some amount of self-selection that happens here. I mean, it's like, the science is a rigorous, sustained discipline. We all want to dream about flying into space, but, the actual people who are going to consider that it's that length of time and all that are a special breed. I don't know. I mean,
it's a little bit like the little red hen. Like, they'll show up when the bread's ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, everybody would pay to fly on a SpaceX thing or to do a Soyuz shuttle if they had the money, but nobody wants to train to be, they don't want to all train to be an astronaut.
No one wants to get a PhD and be a fighter pilot.
Next question, please.
Hi. Given that there are certain points of view, past and present, for which we already are a dystopian future, and other points of view for which we are a utopian future, I guess how do you try to sort out whether you're accidentally on the quote bad side or something in your own fiction or in your own writing?
The bad side in that you are like encouraging Hitler, or?
Well, maybe not so far as that, but possibly historically, or like a couple of years ago, the people who wanted to publish how to make like anthrax more contagious or something.
Oh,
yeah. I'm not smart enough to destroy the world, so I think I'm clear.
Well, you think back to like 9/11, the government had fiction writers come in and do worst case scenarios so that they could help predict like what do we need to be worried about, and like somebody had written a scenario about planes being flown into buildings, and it's like a bad time travel movie. Like, you might be triggering something, but you might also be saving the world, and you don't really know. But generally, when I'm writing about, like, my book Orleans. My mom was a Katrina survivor, and my book is definitely a reaction to what happened. And even though it is set in the future, and that happened, so like nothing's going to change that now until we have time travel and do something we shouldn't. But nothing's going to change that now. So if that book inspires the next Hitler, let's hope it doesn't. Who's to say it was this book as opposed to the situation in the world that inspired the book? So I think there's some things you just can't bring home with you. You can't worry about.
I think there is a tendency for investors and technocrats to seek to use technology as a solution to human problems without necessarily going through the effort to think about what other harms that technology might do. And again, I think that fiction is a really good opportunity for us to explore the kinds of harms that happen when certain technologies, like the one you're talking about the privilege of being able to edit DNA if it's not equitably shared. So I think that it is really important that we keep hassling technocrats to think about the social ramifications of the technology that we're coming up with.
I think we're all susceptible, and this election year is actually a really good example of it. We're all susceptible to the sophism that there is a simple, commonsensical solution to any problem, to any complicated problem. And I think that, one of the reasons why there's a certain candidate, and I'm not going to say which one, but, who comes out and says, we're going to do this, and it's going to be fixed, And I think that it's the same with science. It's very easy to think, well, we're going to come up with one toggle switch that you can pull, and then there's no more cancer. But you have to think about, but what are the 5 billion ways that can go sideways or do things that are unprecedented? And I think that's a big part of. I think that we can help with that, but a lot of it is the technological forecasting, but a lot of it is also just trying to use our own sense of empathy as creative people to shed a light on the human condition through fiction.
I kind of have a thought experiment sort of based on that. So you're president of the Earth, and a time traveler shows up and says you can have all the technology from 1 century ahead. You can't pick a la carte, so you can't just pick cancer and we're going to solve climate change. You get the whole package, everything. Would you take that? Would you take that offer?
No.
Why? Why, Javi? Why?
Well, we have to stop. Our panel is over, but because I think that it's more interesting to watch humanity figure itself out than to take any shortcuts.
I would also say no, because clearly this is a Twilight Zone episode, and the time traveler from the time traveler from the future comes from when the future is ruined, and he's just like, I have nothing, and he just opens the box and there's nothing there, and he's like, you're gonna ruin it, you maniacs.
I think we need the 100 years to prepare ourselves for what comes next.
Folks, booth AA09 in the Autograph Pavilion. Come meet us. We've got books. We'll get them signed. We hope to see you all there.
Yep.
Any comics, please come take them. They're free. The art is good.
Bring tacos.
Big tacos.